Our entire global economy, everything from the food on our tables to the fuel in our cars, runs on a network of critical supply chains. But as these lifelines have gone digital, they've also become prime targets for a whole new generation of cyber threats. And let's be clear, this isn't just a business risk anymore. It's a genuine threat to our way of life. So the big question is, how do you defend our physical world against an invisible enemy? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the research of Dr. Arisian to unpack a powerful new framework designed for exactly this fight.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on what makes this threat so different. Then, we'll introduce the core strategy to fight back, a concept called cooperative resilience. We'll break down how it works, look at the hard numbers on the value it creates, and see what we can learn from how different countries are tackling this. And finally, we'll lay out the key imperatives for building the secure supply chains of the future.
All right, let's get right into it. For decades, supply chain risk was about things you could see coming, hurricanes, factory fires, things like that. Cyber attacks? They're a completely different beast. They're intentional, they're precise, and this is the critical part. Their impact is totally asymmetric. A single person writing a few lines of code can cause billions of dollars in real-world physical damage. They're not just disrupting the game, they're flipping the whole board over. Just look at the attack on JBS Foods back in 2021. This wasn't just some IT problem for one company. A single ransomware attack brought meat processing to a screeching halt in the US, Australia, and Canada. This was a systemic shockwave that directly threatened the global food supply and raised very real questions about food security for millions of people. And we saw that exact same ripple effect with the Colonial Pipeline that same year. One attack on one company, and suddenly the largest fuel pipeline in the United States goes dark. The result? Panic buying, massive fuel shortages up and down the East Coast. It was a terrifyingly clear demonstration of how a single digital weak point can paralyze our most essential physical infrastructure. And it's not just food and energy. Think about the logistics networks, the very arteries of our economy. In 2020, Australia's Toll Group, a giant in that space, got hammered by two huge ransomware attacks. Everything just stopped. Parcel tracking went down, deliveries were gridlocked, and major stores couldn't get their products. The entire system got clogged. And this right here is the absolute key difference. The research makes it plain. This isn't like a storm that hits everyone in a region the same way. Cyber attacks are surgical. They go after specific vulnerabilities at specific sites, which means the damage is unpredictable and highly targeted. And that's a problem our old risk management playbook, just having a few backup suppliers, is completely unprepared to handle. So, that brings us to the solution. If we're going to fight a networked threat, well, it stands to reason we need a networked defense. And that requires a fundamental shift in our thinking, a new strategic paradigm called coopetitive resilience. Now, coopetitive, it sounds a bit like a buzzword, I know, but it's really straightforward. It's a framework where fierce competitors in the same critical industry make a strategic choice to cooperate on cybersecurity, even while they're still competing on everything else. The basic idea is simple but powerful. A cyber threat to one of us is a threat to all of us. The only logical response is to defend together.
Okay, great concept, but how do you actually make it work in the real world? Well, this framework is built on 3 pillars that are designed to work together, creating a system that's not just strong, but also adaptive.
First, you need government-led platforms to share threat intelligence. Second, you need smart contracts, specifically what are called flexible contracts, to get all the financial incentives pointing in the right direction. And third, you need to integrate these pieces into one seamless collaborative engine. So let's take a look at each one.
At the base of all this are what we call cyber threat intelligence platforms, or CTIPs. Now, here's the problem CTIPs are designed to solve. In a normal market, companies don't like to share their threat data with competitors, and they often underinvest in security. It's a classic market failure. CTIPs fix this. They're a neutral, government-run space where rivals can share information securely and collaborate without fear.
And hey, this isn't just theory. As you can see here, the world's leading economies are already building these platforms. The US has Cybex, the UK has their CISP, Australia has the ACSC. The details are different, but the strategic intent is exactly the same. Bring the public and private sectors together to build a much stronger collective defense.
Now for the second pillar, which is really the economic engine that makes this whole thing go, the flexible minimum order quantity contract. Here's the challenge it solves. When a crisis hits, you need a backup supplier. But that backup supplier doesn't want to build a bunch of expensive extra capacity that might just sit there unused. This special type of contract aligns everyone's interests. The buyer promises to buy a certain minimum amount, which gives the supplier the confidence to invest in that extra capacity. In return, the buyer gets the crucial flexibility to ramp up their order the moment a disruption happens. It's a true win-win.
No, the framework is solid. It's logical. But what's the actual quantifiable payoff? To figure that out, the research looks beyond just company profits and measures the total value this strategy creates for all of society. And this is a really important shift in how we think about success. When we're talking about food, energy, healthcare, the goal isn't just about maximizing profit for a few companies. It's about maximizing what's called economic welfare. This is a much bigger picture metric that adds up the value for customers and the value for companies and then subtracts the costs of the government. It's the true bottom line for society.
And when you run the analysis, the results are just undeniable. This chart tells the whole story. On one side, you have the economic welfare created by our old go-it-alone strategies. On the other, the cooperative resilience model. The conclusion is data-driven and clear. This cooperative framework delivers significantly higher economic welfare, especially when the risks are high. It proves that working together creates more total value for everyone by cutting waste, speeding up recovery, and keeping the entire market stable.
So the evidence is clear that the model works. The next big question is, okay, how do you implement it effectively? And it turns out that how the government designs the policy around it is absolutely critical. And if you compare what global leaders are doing, you see a very clear pattern of what works and what doesn't. Just take a look at this. The Global Cybersecurity Index scores tell a fascinating story. The US and the UK are right at the top of the pack. And what do they have in common? Mandatory cybersecurity standards, strong enforcement, real penalties if you don't comply. Now contrast that with Australia, which has a lower score. Historically, their approach has relied heavily on voluntary frameworks. And this quote from the research just hits the nail on the head. When security measures are optional, it allows companies to make their own call, and often that means underinvesting. That creates weak links in the chain that put the entire system at risk. The lesson from around the world is unambiguous. For critical infrastructure, voluntary measures are simply not enough. Policy needs to have teeth. So let's pull all of this together. What are the key, actionable insights we need to walk away with? And what's the path forward to actually secure our future?
It really comes down to 4 strategic imperatives. First, we have to accept that just having a few backup suppliers is an obsolete strategy against these kinds of threats. Second, building true resilience means using hybrid strategies that make smart contracts with deep cooperation. Third, government platforms and mandatory policies, these aren't just nice ideas, they are non-negotiable enablers of our collective security. And finally, and maybe most importantly, for our most critical sectors, we have to change our definition of success, from individual company profit to overall societal economic welfare. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. As our physical and digital worlds continue to merge into one, and as these threats become more and more systemic, is this kind of structured, radical collaboration not just a good idea, but the only viable defense for the supply chains that we all depend on for our survival? The evidence we've looked at today suggests the answer is a clear and resounding yes.